There it is, okay. Come over by you because I know you're in the frame. Hi everybody, thank you for coming. I'd like to thank Jabron, come up to handle some book sales. Matt got some books here. He's been writing for several years now and has quite a collection of titles for you to read and choose from. I just wrote we're going to read a little bio in a second. I do want to let you know that we are streaming to YouTube, and if anybody's watching on YouTube, just know that you can submit any questions in the chat, and I'll make sure Matt has them. Would you prefer during or after?
I'll probably break 2 or 3 times and see if there's any questions, because I'd rather have an interaction.
Great, great. I want to let you know we have all kinds of stuff happening at the Bangor Public Library, of course, depending on your comfort level, but we have lots of things online. We have lots of things going on in the building. We also have 2 more authors coming up this fall. Brian Schwartz will be here with his newest Civil War book in October. And then Bill Kenny and his wife Kathy will be here in November for their historic piece titled Historic Taverns and Tea Rooms of Maine. And he will have a slideshow of images to go along with that. Also want to let you know that in December, we have the Smithsonian traveling exhibit, Americans in the Holocaust, coming in, and that will be here for several weeks, and that will take up most of the 3rd floor. Matt is a highly acclaimed, award-winning author of the Mainly Mystery series. And of course, as you know, Mainly Power was selected as one of the Maine Humanities Council Read Me books by Jerry Boyle this summer. So it was a great opportunity with that, wasn't it?
I'm smiling behind this mask, just so you know.
It's kind of hard to tell, isn't it? Look, there you go. Look at you see the little happy eyes. This would follow by Mainly Fear and Mainly Money. Mainly Angst will be published this coming January. I Am Cuba, Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution, winner of the Cox Featherling Award, was his first traditionally published novel in March 2020. The second historical novel, Love in the Time of Hate, was just published in August. Wolf Trap was the first in the Clay Wolfport Essex Trap series. Mine Trap will be published in October. Mouse Trap will come out next April. And then Honey Trap will be out next fall. You are a busy little writer, aren't you?
It's been a pandemic. There's not much else to do now, is there?
Over the years, Matt has owned a video store, a mystery book store, and a gym. He's also taught history and coached just about every sport imaginable. He lives in Brunswick, Maine with his wife Harper. There are 4 grown children, Brittany, Pearson, Miranda, and Ryan, and a chocolate lab and a basset hound round out the mix. And now he spends his days at the computer, writing, and as he said, there's been a pandemic, so he has many more coming right out. Matt, thank you for coming up.
Well, thank you for having me. Like I said, anytime you have any questions, feel free to interrupt, but I'll probably start off with a little bit on my path to publication and see if you have anything to say about that. Because even though I've been getting published the last couple years, it's really been 30 years in the making. I actually wrote I Am Cuba, Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution in 1990. So I wrote a first draft of that book in 1990, my first year out of college. It was inspired by a Latin American history teacher that was very passionate about the subject. I was a history major, and I thought it would be pretty neat to write. Finished the first draft, and I realized 3 things. First, I wasn't a very good writer. Second, I needed to do a lot more research. And third, and most important probably, is that I needed to visit Cuba to give authenticity and sincerity to it. So kind of just threw that manuscript on a bottom shelf, got dusty over time, and bided my time, and continued, you know, every day, every week to kind of follow up and keep up with Cuba and research and pick up tidbits and also work on my writing. But that took a step back for a little bit when I, you know, had kids, opened the businesses that were talked about, and I decided to come back to a mystery in around 2000, some 10 years later, and work on my craft by writing a mystery. And that's actually when I wrote the first draft of Mainly Power, which is, you know, the reason I'm here probably, because it was selected by Jerry Boyle and the Maine Humanities Council as the Read Me Book of the Year. 20 years ago I wrote that, and I realized that I still needed more work on that at the time. And that hit a dusty bottom shelf. And I followed up with Mainly Fear a few years later. Same sort of thing, I peddled it around a little, didn't have much luck, and put them away. And I kept working on the craft and moving forward. Around 2009, I was teaching history in the Brunswick Junior High School, and I took a summer class at Bowdoin College, a 2-week teaching biography in the classroom. And I got excited to come back and write biography, and I decided instead of an exotic island in the Caribbean like Cuba, I would pick Joshua Chamberlain as my topic, who started off up here in Brewer, but spent most of his years of life in Brunswick. And so it was a little closer to home, and between the Bowdoin College Historical Museum and this and that. And I took about 6 years to write that, and when I finished that in 2014, 2015, I thought it was pretty good. I finally said, you know, I'm kind of there, but I didn't have any takers. And so I said, hey, I'm going to self-publish this. So I self-published it through Amazon CreateSpace in 2015, did some rounds with it, sold some books, did pretty well, got a lot of good reviews. And in the following year, I finally got the chance to go to Cuba. So in 2016, I took a trip to Cuba with my son, and we followed the Revolutionary War trail of Fidel Castro and the guerrillas, you know, starting out in the mountains outside of Santiago and across the island to Havana, and found a lot of really important things, such as how 300 bearded guerrillas were able to defeat an army of 10,000 in the summer offensive of 1958. And it was just the sheer ruggedness of the terrain that they were hiding in that just wouldn't allow an army to pass through or up the mountains, or, you know, I could barely make it up to the command post that is still sits there. So, you know, I learned a lot of sincere and authentic things there. I'd been doing my research for years and years, and honing my craft of writing. So I went back out and I found a publisher this time who was willing to publish it. And I got that published in March of 2020, which also happened to coincide with COVID. So lots of things were canceled, unfortunately. So, you know, I had a lot of big events planned, and, you know, I had 100 stress balls ready to hand out at all these events. And so if you want a stress ball that says I am Cuba, I still have plenty, and I brought some. So they're free for the taking on the way out the door. But after the publisher agreed to publish I Am Cuba, I came to him and I said, I've got these other 2 books, mystery novels, and they need work. But if I, you know, remaster, recraft, and really kind of dig into them and make them better, would you be willing to take a look at them? And the publisher said, sure, you know. And I went back and I dug into Mainly Power and remastered it, and Mainly Fear, and they took them and published Mainly Power last September. Jerry Boyle selected it as his book for the Maine Humanities Council, and that sort of touched me off. So I followed up and I wrote a third book in the series as well, Mainly Money. And it generally takes about a year or a little bit more for a book to come out, so these things are all staggered when they're happening. But along those lines, about that time I decided to write a new series as well, so I started with The Wolf Trap, and I'll get into talking about, you know, the different series and the nuances and the differences between them. Candy nicely introduced them, but that's kind of where I'm at now, is I've got 2 published Clay Wolf books and 2 on tap, 3 mainly mysteries that have been published and a 4th coming in January. I have the Joshua Chamberlain book, which is almost and then it's almost a series because Love in a Time of Hate follows the same fictional character out of Joshua Chamberlain. So in Joshua Chamberlain, I tell the story of the Civil War through Joshua Chamberlain, the 2.5 years that he was there, through the eyes of a 14-year-old aide that also comes down from Brewer and has been orphaned by the war, and asks Joshua Chamberlain if it's okay if we'll take him to the war as an aide, and he does that. And through the course of the war, he grows up, and at the conclusion of the Civil War, he's going to go off to New Orleans and join the Freedmen's Bureau and become afterwards, when that shuts down, become a Metropolitan Police officer. And that is Love in a Time of Hate, the story of the fight for social equality and freedom in New Orleans. Any questions, thoughts, inputs on what I've said so far? I'm going to give a long pause here just to give my voice a break.
Is there a basis for the idea of the 14-year-old? Just curious about that. Did he have...
There was no reality that happened, but many young boys did go to the Civil War in that capacity,
Okay.
amongst other capacities. And one of the reasons I did it, and I use a similar device in my I Am Cuba book, because Joshua Chamberlain and Fidel Castro are actually very similar people. They're both pretty larger than life, but they're both pretty conceited. And what we know about both of them is through the writing that they've done. So most of what we know about Joshua Chamberlain is through the massive writing that he did about himself. And this is true of Fidel Castro as well. So I figured by using this fictional character, this boy Emmett Collins, it would cast a more even-tempered lens upon him, if you will, so that, you know, if it was through Joshua Chamberlain's eyes, you wouldn't see his failings ever. So by using Emmett Collins, I'm able to show his failings. And I do the same thing in I Am Cuba with Vicente Bolivar, who shows the failings of Fidel Castro, which is another interesting one because what we know of Fidel Castro comes through 2 very distinct camps that are very polarized. It's Fidel Castro's version, which is very carefully manipulated to present himself looking as, you know, a messiah figure, and the very wealthy, intelligent community that he expels from Cuba when he takes power and sends to Miami, basically, who live there and really hate Fidel Castro, so their version of him is just the polar opposite of his version for himself. So trying to find that middle ground between the 2 of those things was difficult, but that was one of the things that I worked hard to do. So yeah, I guess I can give a quick overview of the different books. And one of the interesting things about the mainly mystery series, as I told you, I wrote the first 2 books some 20 years ago approximately, and I wrote the 3rd one just recently. So I had a decision to make. Was I going to go back in time for Mainly Money, the 3rd book, or was I going to jump it into the future? Because Mainly Power, the first book, Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mainly Power, the first book, is based on a suspicious death of a security advisor at a nuclear power plant, which is basically Maine Yankee, but we call it Down East Power in the book. And the premise, one of the premises that this is based upon is I was talking to a clam digger in Brunswick one day who told me that he would go right up to the walls of Maine Yankee raking clams, and that there was little to no security. And I talked around to some other fishermen and clam diggers and found that coming into the bay and the tidal flats, that was true. Well, I said this on Maine Calling a couple months ago on the radio show, and we got a call in from the former security advisor, head of security at Maine Yankee, who said that was absolutely not true, and that their security was second to none and very high. And since that radio show, I've had many people come to me and say, yeah, we used to kayak up and walk around the buildings all the time. So I'm sure inside Maine Yankee buildings it was very highly secure. But so the idea was there's this nuclear power plant that isn't protected like a national defense site or a nuclear silo or something. On Mainly Power, this suspicious death that I talk of is on page 3. I killed the head of security at Down East Power. And I'm still wondering if this former head of security at Maine Yankee really disagreed with what I said about how easy it was to walk in there, or if they were unhappy with me because I killed them on page 3. That kind of goes back to the Maine Yankee, and that's, so it's a roughly 2,000 book, and actually based a little earlier. And then Mainly Fear stems out of the ice storm of 1998, which I'm sure we all remember. And I had the concept that, 70% of the state is out of power. People are moving in with relatives, or going out of state, or staying in hotels. Alarm systems are down. What a right time for, burglars to come and vandalize or burgle things. And I have a young boy who's a promising basketball player at a sort of elite prep school who gets caught doing this. And the mother hires our hero, Goff Langdon, to investigate not if he did it, because he was caught red-handed, but why he did it. And we're going to kind of dig into several different possibilities. So I guess at this point I should comment that, my protagonist of this series is Goff Langdon.
What was the name again?
Goff Langdon.
Okay.
And he's if you break it, you have to buy it.
Right?
And he's a grown and raised in Brunswick, goes to college, returns to Brunswick, and thankfully to crazy Aunt Zelda, who dies and leaves him a small inheritance, he's able to fulfill his 2 dreams. One is to be a private investigator, and the other is to own a mystery bookstore. And this mystery bookstore is going to be called the Coffee Dog Bookstore, which is actually a bookstore that I owned in Brunswick in the 1990s.
Coffee Dog. Oh.
Gary wasn't too happy with me. That's another reason. The Coffee Dog Bookstore is named after my chocolate lab of the time, the Coffee Dog. And so the only real place in the book and the only real character are the Coffee Dog and the Coffee Dog Bookstore. And then I sort of fictionalized the rest of Brunswick around that and changed place names and whatnot. And he has a very colorful cast of characters. He's got, the sprightly Cheval who works for him at the bookstore. and might be his desire, and vice versa. He knows the massive cop Bart, who's gruff and bad-tempered, and the hippie lawyer Jimmy 4x4, who is a bit of a womanizer, but kind of a good guy at the same time. And the immigrants, Richard and Jewel. So there's this wide cast of colorful characters that fill out the mix to surround the real character of Coffee Dog himself. So then when mainly money comes about, I made the decision to skip 19 years of their life and jump forward. So there's always the possibility of coming back with mainly mystery 2.2 and 2.4 and kind of filling in the gaps there a little bit. But mainly money brings us up to 2020 and deals with a United States senator who's being blackmailed, and it becomes a wide variety of people that could be the blackmailer, you know, from the Russians or the Chinese to environmentalists who are trying to get her vote on certain things, and other government agencies. So it's about the blackmail of a United States senator.
From Maine.
From Maine. Margaret Mercer. She lives in Bath. And she's a combination of a few different people probably, but she's not too far from Susan, but she's definitely not Susan.
Any Angus thrown in there? A little bit of Angus thrown in?
A little bit of Angus thrown in. Yeah, a little Angus, a little Susan, and a bit of other people. So I try hard not to make anybody a real person, for sure, no matter what I'm writing.
Just keep us guessing.
Yeah.
So he's a private investigator, this guy, Goth.
Yeah.
So how is he involved, like, in the Yankee, or whatever?
He's
The,
in the first book, mainly Power,
Yeah.
with the power plant. He's hired by the widow of the security guard because it's ruled that the security guard Harold Dunphy committed suicide,
Okay.
and she doesn't believe that happened. She didn't particularly like him much, but she did want the life insurance policy. So she hires him to prove that he was actually murdered. And that sort of starts the ball rolling there. The fourth one coming out in January, mainly Angst, delves into COVID. And there's several different storylines going, but the major one is Goff Langdon is hired to try and find a kidnapped boy, which obviously the police and a lot of federal agencies are looking for as well. But the parents hire him to, you know, lead his own investigation into it. And this boy is being held and threatened with execution on Halloween at midnight on All Hallows Eve if the governor doesn't ease business restrictions and masking requirements. And you know, I had a similar idea to start, and that was not the direction it was going to go, but that is the direction the book tended to go. I think there was just no other option for it. But in Brunswick, we have a big town mall between Bowdoin College and the main street of Brunswick. And this becomes this gathering ground as anti-vaxxers come in support of this, and then the protesters against them come in against that, and all of a sudden there's hundreds and hundreds of people on the mall each day chanting at each other, and it doesn't turn out nearly as you would think it would, and it takes many a twist and a turn, but this is always the toughest part about giving the little overview of the book, is how much to give and not to give too much. But I'm looking forward to the release of that one. But at the same time, I did pigeonhole myself a little bit. It's things that I wished I hadn't necessarily done. But Langdon actually happens to be my middle name. Why I gave my protagonist, who is not me, a fictional character, my middle name, I don't know, but I just started, so I'm often getting questioned, is this you, or it's like, no, it's not. And a lot of the characters I've mentioned, some of them, Shabal and Richam and Goff, where did you get those names? Well, to tell you the truth, I used to, my daughter, when I'd give her a bath at night and she was 2 years old, 3 years old, had these little play toys, and she would give them names and she would kind of skewer real names. So I think Richard became Richam. And I said, oh, that'd be a great name. And I put it in my book. But, so there's an oddness to some of the mainly mystery names and to the fact that Langdon is in there, that it's in my hometown. So people are always trying to figure out if, this is them or this is that person. And it's like, no, everybody but the coffee dog is fictional. And, and then you're kind of hemmed in by some other things as well. And it's not terrible. I'm loving the series and I'm going to continue with it. But I said, let's do another series where we go a straight up fictional name with a guy with his own name. And we move on to that. And so I picked a coastal town, and it was fictional. It's Port Essex. And as I was telling Jabron, it's loosely based on Booth Bay Harbor, but it's really not Booth Bay Harbor because I changed a lot of the things. But that just kind of gives me my point of reference to a certain degree. And this, instead of an amateur bookstore owning PI, I still have a PI, but he's a former Boston homicide detective. So he has a little more street cred. He's a little tougher. This series is going to be a little bit more of a thriller series versus a mystery series, which I've been to a lot of writing conferences, and you'll hear many debates on what a thriller versus a mystery is. And I think the best that I've ever, that I can explain it myself that makes sense to me, is the mystery tends to be something happens, and the detective or person tries to untangle and find out who done it. And a thriller is something is going to happen, and you have to race against time to stop it before it's too late. And that's the best separation between mystery and thriller that I think I've got. And so I'm trying to make my Clay Wolf Port Essex series a little bit more of a thriller, a little more race against time, a little more action-packed, and moving along a little quicker. And so I've got a Wolf Trap. The first one is based on the premise that heroin is being smuggled through lobster traps off the coast of Maine. And it's becoming a port of entry for heroin throughout all of New England. And as I delve into that, and this is a couple years ago, and it's really the start of when it's really coming out about the fentanyl-laced heroin and how dangerous and how deadly it is in our country. And so this kind of just built as I went through it, but Clay Wolf has to stop, find out who's doing it and stop it from happening. And so that's kind of the race against time there, because it's coming to a deadline on that. This second one, which technically comes out October 6th, so if you buy it over there from Gibran, he's breaking the rules, and might have to go to jail. But no, actually, I got copies of it, and I did ask my publisher for permission to sell it here. As I'm like, well, I've got the books in my hand. Do you mind if I sell them early? And they said, no, that's fine. So I brought some up. But this is a cult that is threatening the town of Port Essex, and maybe a larger area than that. It sort of starts off as what they think is, a white nationalist movement happening in town, and then they realize that there's this cult compound that nobody speaks about too much, and attacks and misdeeds start to grow in intensity, and Clay Wolf realizes that there's real trouble coming down the pike. And so Clay Wolf is the former Boston homicide detective, the football star from Port Essex that went off to Boston University, became a homicide detective, and then in his mid-30s got a little jaded because rich people were walking free and the poor people were being put in jail and blah, 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 stuff like that. And at the same time, his grandpops, who had raised him because his parents died in a crash when he was 8, started to have some failing health issues. So he decided to tie it up, quit the force, move back to Port Essex, take care of his grandpops, and become a PI in town. No mystery detective, but mostly investigating insurance fraud and doing security for people coming into this wealthy summer community and things like that. But we get a few larger cases thrown in as well. I do like a colorful cast of characters, so we keep a colorful cast of characters going in this one. His receptionist is Bailey Baker. As we progress through the book, she's going to kind of rise in the ranks of the firm and in his eyes, and there's sort of a dwindling sexual tension there between the two of them, but they have too many hang-ups to act upon that, or at least so far. There is the person who hires them in the first book is going to actually come to work for him in future books. Who Crystal Landry is a former heroin user herself, who's a sort of foul-mouthed, salt-of-the-earth lady who has a lot of character to her. There's a Barfly, who is another good friend of Clay Wolf's and a good source of information because he spends a lot of his time at the bars. But he had been a former IRA soldier and fled Ireland when he was in his 20s and came to Port Essex and spent 50 years clamming before retiring to the bars. And then there's the newspaper editor, Cloutier, who is another great source of information and a good friend. And so this band of characters is going to kind of band together in a lot of these stories. The third one that comes out in April, Mousetrap, is going to delve into genome editing. And you could think Jackson Laboratories if you want, but it's actually called Johnson Laboratories. And it's not in Bar Harbor, but it's in Port Essex. And they're doing really high-level testing on mice. And really able to change a lot of things. And the technology really exists out there to give human beings different traits, eye colors, stronger, smarter, and it's sort of frowned upon. And so nobody's really doing it, or are they? And that's sort of the basis of what's happening at Johnson Laboratories. And the third book, which is not out yet, if you were looking for that.
Oh, no, I was just looking, each one ends in trap, I just want, that's what I thought. It's
Yeah.
very clever, I like that. So you only have to think of the first word.
Yeah, I'm trying to brand them, if you'll see that, we got the same images
Yeah,
going as well.
it's nice.
Now, the mainly ones are better because they're easier to find. There's wolf traps and mine traps out there. So if you were to go to, the bookstore down here in Bangor and ask for mine trap, there might be 3, 4, 5, 6 options. And then you also have to have my name.
You mean other books with the same title?
Yeah.
Oh.
But if you ask for mainly power, it's unique. Mainly fear, mainly money, because of the mainly at the beginning.
Yeah.
So whether it's at the local bookstore or at Amazon or Barnes and Noble or however people shop these days, it was much better branded to go with the mainly powers just because it's easier to find, I think. But I like the trap titles.
Yeah.
It's just a little harder to find.
Mousetrap, it's cute.
And then Honey Trap,
Oh, yeah.
that is written and coming out in September, is actually the UAPTF. Have you been reading it all? Because I started writing this before I even had seen it in the newspaper, and so I morphed it over into using what it was actually called, the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force. So the federal government has actually, just in August of last year, put in a task force to examine all this unexplained aerial phenomenon that's been going around. And I think they try and make it really difficult to remember. UFOs had such a good ring to it, but what's a UAP? So actually in the book, Clay, Wolf, and Bailey are going to say, wouldn't it be much better to be a mysterious aerial phenomenon? A map. That's easy to remember, so they start calling it a map anyways. But these unidentified aerial phenomenons are taking place over Port Essex. And so the task force sends in a couple representatives to research and look into what's going on. And again, that's going to grow into something much larger. But they're going to hire Clay Wolf and Bailey Baker to be their local liaison and show them around town while they're investigating this happening.
What's the honey?
What's that?
The honey part of it.
A honey trap, technically speaking, is a secret agent that uses their sexual wiles to glean information.
Okay.
And there's going to be 2 potential honey traps in this
Okay.
that are gleaning this information. So that gives away a little bit as you jump into what the title actually means as to where the book might be going in some of, but not too much actually, so there's still a lot of options. So that's kind of the difference between my 2 mystery series, which is, enough difference in there already. But then there's the historicals that I write, which are vastly different in both time and energy and scope and how they're written, but they involve so much more research. So, you say that I'm writing lots of books. Once you get a series going, you've got your characters, you've got the town, you've got all this in place. You just need a plot, and then you can just fly with it. But, when I had Joshua Chamberlain book, I was teaching at the time, but it took 6 years to write that. And it took several years to do the Love in a Time of Hate as well, because of all the research that involves. Went to New Orleans, researched there. That was terrible. But so there's all this more research, and I'm constantly fact checking. And it might be easier to, what I'm actually writing now is I decided to just do a straight up cross between my historicals and my mysteries. And I'm about 15,000 words into a new PI story that's going to be tentatively called Brooklyn 8LO. And it's set in 1923 Brooklyn about a PI. So I am bringing my mystery PI into a different era. And I would say just about every sentence I have to check something, you know. What did the telephones look like then? You know, the elevated cars in Brooklyn, you know, what was the difference between them and their subway system at the time? You know, were the roads cobblestoned, you know? So it's a lot more work on that, which is fun. I'm a history major and a former history teacher, so I enjoy that. So it's kind of nice balancing these different things.
What is your time period for history that you're most interested in, or maybe that you had the most experience in school with studying?
I would say that I liked American history the most.
Yeah.
And, you know, anywhere from the Revolutionary War up until the present. So I haven't written about the Revolutionary War, but you know, the Joshua Chamberlain book is set during the Civil War, and it's about Joshua Chamberlain during the Civil War. And then Love in a Time of Hate is set during the period of Reconstruction after the Civil War. And now I'm going to jump up to 1923, which was a lot of fun, but it's still quite possible that I'll go back to Emmett Collins and follow him out of Reconstruction. I've thought about maybe, you know, he was in the cavalry in the Civil War, and then he was part of the cavalry unit of the Metropolitan Police in New Orleans. So I've thought about sending him over to Texas to be a horse wrangler, or have his own horses in Texas.
He actually was in the cavalry?
He's my fictional character.
Yeah, the little boy, the 14-year-old, right?
Well, he wasn't in the cavalry, but Joshua Chamberlain and his entourage would ride horses.
Okay.
So he rode the horses along with Joshua Chamberlain into battle, or following up the battles and things like that. So he's very familiar with horses. And as you know, I Am Cuba took me 30 years to write. So
That's a wide range of subjects, topics.
no, it's nice to have that variety.
Yeah.
I'm under contract for 2023, or I've got 4 books coming out next year, but then 2023 I've decided to cut back, and I'm under contract for 3 books, and I'm going to follow the 3 series. So I'm going to write 3 books a year, and it's going to be the Mainly Mystery series and the Clay Wolf Port Essex series, and then I'm going to follow the 8LO series. 8LO is the name of my PI. So he's a Hungarian immigrant, or his parents were, and his mother was certain that he was going to be a girl, but he fooled her and was born, and he was the 8th child, and the father was away at sea working. So the mother wrote down on the birth sheet that he was the 8th child, meaning to change it later, and never did. So his name remained 8, and Balo is a Hungarian last name. So that is my PI's name, and I'm going to follow him. I'm becoming increasingly sure that I will follow him, because 1920s Brooklyn is pretty amazing. The just legendary figures. And I've already had him cross paths with Dorothy Parker and Zelda and Scott Fitzgerald, and Coleman Hawkins, and I'm thinking about bringing Babe Ruth into play. You know, so, and there's just so many more that it's, you know, they're not going to be major characters, but he's going to pass through the orbits in his investigations of, and not just people, but events that are happening. Actually, my daughter lives in Brooklyn, so I just took last week to go visit her for a week and research
Nice.
at the same time. And you know, with the prohibition and the speakeasies and the jazz scene and the Coney Island and the boardwalk exploding, and they brought in the nickel cars so that everybody could get to Coney Island. And so it just got bigger and bigger, and you know, the Wonder Wheel was there, and this great music scene and sports going on. It's just a real fun place. I think 1920s Brooklyn is one of the meccas of all of history, you know. And you never hear that much. You know, you hear Paris and, you know, or even New York City. But Brooklyn, you don't really hear that much. And the more I dig into it, the more, you know, and it's such a melting pot of immigrants that are pouring in. So there's, you know, people from all over, the Italians and the Jews and the Irish, and they're all intermingling. And I think pretty much probably the Great Depression is going to change, and all of a sudden everybody goes back to their own neighborhood. The Italians are here, and the Irish are here, and the Hungarians are here, and the German. You know, but in the 1920s, it seemed like they just intermixed, and you know, there was not this hang-up on ethnicity so much. Right down to the gangsters, you know, two of the most famous gangsters born are from that time period there, Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky. You know, this Italian kid and this Jewish kid are going to team up and create, you know, this one of the biggest organized crime syndicates the world's known. So the precursors to the Mafia. A little late, a couple years after where my book is, they're still around with Murder Incorporated. But both Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky are in my book. Because, you know, it just has the opportunity to do that sort of thing.
So that book's written, or it's going to
No, that book is at the very beginning.
Okay.
I'm about 15,000 words into it. And it'll end up being around 85 to 90.
How do you write? Do you handwrite, type,
I type.
dictate, type?
And the best way I know how is to write every day. You know, I truly, you know, write almost every day. You know, sometimes something comes up, but most often is not. Even if I have something else to do, I'll write for 3 or 4 hours in the morning and just knock it down. Because I find if I miss a couple days, then you got to start over almost. It's like, where was I? What was going on? What was happening? Unfortunately, when you write every day, your mind's just always toiling. So, you know, last night I'm lying in bed going, okay, this is good. It's like, oh, stop it, turn it off. But, you know,
draw out little
like,
webs and stuff to keep track of everybody?
I have an outline that I keep on each person, and then I'll make some theme notes, and then I keep an outline. Mostly my outlines come either like right before I write a chapter or even after I write a chapter, just to keep track of what I said and did during that chapter, or to say, okay, what am I going to write about? And I'll come up with, you know, 3 ideas and put it in that chapter to write. So,
when a story kind of pops into your mind, do you flesh out the whole story? Do you have the end point and you have to backtrack? Or do you kind of let it take its own path?
Yep.
Yep.
I would say a little bit of all of those at some point, you know?
Mhm.
I mean, it'll often start with an idea. So, you know, what's, you know, certainly with the mysteries is, you know, what would happen if heroin's being smuggled through lobster traps? You know, that seems like a brilliant idea. I'm thinking somebody's tried that. And if not, maybe I should. No, wait, is this on camera?
You're giving a lot of ideas.
And then, you know, they call it pantsers versus outliners, people that write by the seat of their pants. And I'm probably a combination of the two. But I'll start writing, and then like when I'm lying there at midnight with things toiling around in my mind, I either get up then or I get up the next morning and I'll go, okay, this is what's going to happen at the halfway point. Even though I'm still at the beginning, here's what's going to happen because I've had an idea.
Yeah.
And by the time I get to the halfway point, that might be gone. Might not be pertinent anymore, but often it is. And I do like to have those marks to shoot for, the 1/4, the half, the 3/4. That sort of drives me forward. So it's like, okay, I'm getting to this big climatic scene. So I definitely write a lot faster and I think better when I do have a climatic scene to work towards, because I know what the goal is, I know the mountain I'm climbing.
Do you think Clay and Goff will ever meet?
There's an anthology coming out from Encircle Publications in January or February, I'm not sure when, of short stories by Encircle Publication authors. And in that, I have a short story called Mainly Trapped. And Goff, Langdon, and Chabal go to a mystery dinner in Port Essex where a real murder takes place at this restaurant, the Pelican Perch. And sitting next to them is Clay Wolfe and Bailey Baker.
Of course.
And they put their heads together to try and uncover what happened. Who done it? So yes. Any questions, thoughts?
I have a-
Yeah,
Uh-oh, that's my father, so.
Oh, is it?
Oh, here we go.
and this is a tricky question, but I've always
It always
wondered,
is.
you know, when Matt was 8 years old, he says in introduction to some of his books, he wanted to be a writer. And I thought he wanted to be a football player. So, how did that happen?
After my senior year in high school, I got mono and wasn't able to play football in college. So I had to redirect myself to become a writer.
But I didn't know. I didn't know that since you were 8 years old, you wanted to be a writer.
You didn't pay much attention.
Only to football.
Yeah.
Right.
I was going to ask you who your favorite writers or your favorite books.
You know, I started off when I was 8 years old, loving the Hardy Boys
Yeah.
and Nancy Drew and a lot of those mysteries. Grew a little older into Louis L'Amour. But I would say that, you know, some of my favorite mystery authors are Robert Parker, Carl Hyacin, and Elmore Leonard. But the last couple years, I've become enmeshed in this incredible writing community called Maine, that all I've read is Maine authors. And many of them are Encircle authors because I've come to know them and I read their books. But many of them are just this network of writers that live in Maine. So, you know, there's great books by B.J. Magnani, Kevin St. Jar, S. Lee Manning, which are lesser well known. And then there's more well-known, like Bruce Robert Coffin, Dick Cass, Joseph Souza, and these are all Maine writers, so it's just, I found myself not getting out of Maine in the last year and a half to 2 years, because there's such a fantastic group of Maine writers.
That's where I'm at right now. I love Maine writers,
Yeah,
especially Maine crime writers.
you know, and I don't even read the cozies. There's so many cozy mystery writers in Maine that are just fantastic that I have many good friends, and you know, I pretend to like their books,
Yeah.
but it's not my cup of tea, to use a cozy phrase.
Oh, that's, yeah. I tend to like series too, because you're always looking forward to the next book in a series.
Yeah.
And
Well, I have plenty of series for you.
Yeah.
That's my goal. You are my goal, basically,
Thank
because, you know, that's as I brand, you know, the idea is to get somebody that likes the first book, that
Yeah.
just keeps reading with them and then grow those people,
Right.
so. So, yeah, you're symbolic of my goal. It's not just you. Were there any questions from the
No,
Facebook?
we've
or
got a
YouTube?
couple of people watching, we've got 3, I think one of them's me, but 3 people watching, and nobody's typed in
Yeah,
any questions or comments. I typed that into the chat box myself, but nobody's submitted anything yet.
okay, well, unless you want me to continue blathering, or if anybody has questions, I can talk forever, but.
I think it's just great. Thank you for talking about your series and how they came to be, and I've got a lot of readers in my family, and I'm trying to figure out which one who might like, you know, for Christmas and birthdays.
Oh, Christmas is coming.
It is.
That's the first time I've said that, I think. I'm gonna have to start using that more, right?
You are.
Christmas is coming.
Absolutely.
I was shocked when I owned that mystery bookstore of how many people would come in and fess up that they were buying the book, they were going to read it, and then they were going to give it as a Christmas gift. That was just brilliant, I thought. I
Yeah.
mean, I didn't like it as a bookstore owner, but it's like, no, buy 2.
Yeah. Well, if nobody else has any questions, I'm going to just say, Matt, thank you so much for coming up, bringing your dad with you. It's a beautiful day for a drive, I would think. And look forward to maybe having you back at some point in time along the way with some of your new books that are coming out. It sounds like you're going to have several. So it's really great. And thank you all for coming. And
Well, thank you for having me, Candy. And
you're welcome.
I'd happily come back up the highway anytime, so.
Yeah, thank you, Jabron, for getting the book sales, and you'll be having them down there, and I know we have them at the library here too. So I'm going to stop the stream.
Thank you.
Thank you.